Welcome to Accelerate Science Now, where we sit down with innovators shaping policy, research, and industry to ask one big question: how do we make science move faster and work better for everyone? Today, I'm talking to Tom Kalil, longtime White House Science and Technology Advisor and one of the architects behind the game-changing BRAIN initiative. We talked about what it takes to launch big ideas inside government, how to unlock more breakthrough innovation through new funding models, and how science can be used to solve urgent problems and improve lives. Enjoy the show. Today's guest is Tom Kalil, one of the most influential minds in U.S. science and technology policy over the past 3 decades. Tom has served in the White House under both Presidents Clinton and Obama, where he launched major programs like the National Nanotechnology Initiative and the BRAIN Initiative. He spent his career finding and backing big transformative ideas and figuring out how to get them through bureaucracy and into the real world. Now, he's the founder and CEO of Renaissance Philanthropy, a new organization that supports bold projects to dramatically accelerate science discovery, especially through tools like AI, better research infrastructure, and new institutional models. Whether he's working on AI for science, funding new models for R&D, or helping visionary people build things faster, Tom's focus has always been clear. How do we use science and technology to make life better for everyone? So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So you've gotten to work with quite a few of my colleagues at Seed AI. And so I wanted to ask them, is there anything that they thought I should definitely bring up and talk to you about? One thing that came up a lot was your whiteboard at the White House. So I definitely want to get
Oh,
into
yeah.
that a little bit.
Mhm.
But one question I do want to start with is when did you first read Vonnegut and how does his work inform what you seek to cultivate in your career?
Oh, so this idea of cultivating the cross, I don't know if that's
Hmm.
a concept that you've run into, but it's, people that you meet where you think you are put on earth to work with them to do something awesome together. So that's an idea that has always had a real impact on me. So it's not like, "Oh, we're both alumni of the same university," or something like that, but we're working together to do something really amazing.
Oh, like bit more destiny-like than just
Yes,
coincidence. Oh, wow.
yes.
Well, that's really great. And so does that I mean, so these questions were kind of posed together about the to learn more about the whiteboard and that. So were those kind of similar in a way? Did the Vonnegut influence the whiteboard at all? And could you explain what the whiteboard was?
Sure, yeah, so, when I worked at the White House for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, I had a team of 20, and a lot of them were new to government,
Mhm.
or certainly new to the White House, and there were a set of aphorisms, that I would tell them that would be useful for them to figure out how to get things done. Um, and so, Kumar Garg, who is a member of my team, started this whiteboard in which, anytime I said something that they were like, "Oh, we want to remember this," he would put it on the whiteboard, and then we would add to it over time, and Kumar and other people would add to it. And it was the set of heuristics that we
Mm.
would use. So my favorite example is what idea would you pitch to the president if you had 15 minutes with him, and why aren't you working on that? Um, so
Uh-huh.
I'll give you the sort of the backstory for this, which is
Yeah.
a lot of times people would come visit me and they'd say, "Tom, you're never going to believe it, but it turns out that the thing that I work on is really important." And I would say, "I've never heard that before."
What?
You're but what do you want the White House to do? And a shockingly high
Mhm.
percentage of the time, um, they did not have a good answer to that question. And
Interesting.
because the White House was sort of a black box for them, they were like, "What can the White House do?" So I came up with the following thought experiment, which is you have a meeting, with the president in the Oval Office, and he says, "If you give me a good idea for accelerating the pace of science," or whatever your, cause is, "I will call anyone on the planet."
Wow.
It can be a conference call, so there can be more than one person on the line. If that
Mhm.
person works for me, like the head of NSF or NIH or DARPA or DOE or NASA, I can direct them to do something because 'cause I'm their boss. If it's
Mhm.
someone outside of government, like major philanthropists or CEOs, I can challenge them to do something. So you have to tell me not only what your idea is, but in order to make your idea happen, number one, who would I call? And number two, what would I ask them to do? And the premise of the thought experiment is that a lot of problems require building coalitions, and it's very difficult to build a coalition if you don't know who the members of the coalition are and what the mutually reinforcing steps that you want them to take in the form A does B, so C. So if you like, I can give you an example of how this actually unfolded in
That
the
would be
real
I was
world.
actually gonna ask, did this ever happen? Did someone get to give a 15-minute pitch to the president?
Well, so one a group of researchers
Mhm.
uh, came to visit me, and they had been supported by a group of foundations, including the Kavli Foundation, um, that brought together neuroscientists, people in nanoscience, and people in synthetic biology.
Okay.
And the idea that they had was it is time to do for neuroscience what the Genome Project did for genetics.
Mhm.
And more specifically, that neuroscience is limited by its tools. So we can measure how a very small group of neurons interact, or we can take a fuzzy picture of your entire brain using a technology like fMRI. Um, but we can't do anything in the middle. We can't measure how a neural circuit that might be composed of a million neurons, how does that neural circuit, how do the individual neurons communicate with each other in ways that lead to learning, memory, perception, action, consciousness, and all the other groovy things that the human brain is capable of doing. And so they said, we need an effort that is specifically targeted to develop these new tools that could do for neuroscience what the Genome Project did for genetics, where we lowered the cost of sequencing the human genome from $100 million to now rapidly approaching $100. That's a big deal.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and as
Quite a
and
difference.
as and as soon as they said that, I knew that there were only 3 people in the US government that I would need to convince for this to have legs. The heads of NIH, DARPA, and NSF. So I was thinking to
Mhm.
myself while I was listening to this is a cool idea. I
Mhm.
could see President Obama getting behind it. There's 3 people I need to convince, um, and I had played a role in recruiting 2 of those 3 people, so I thought I
Okay.
had a shot getting it done. So to make a long story short, they all said yes. The president said yes. And then Congress did something that they almost never do for the NIH part of the BRAIN initiative. They provided 10 years of dedicated funding for it. Usually they
Oh,
just dole
wow.
out money 1 year at a time. So that's
Yeah.
what a good day at the office looked like for me.
That's a
Someone
really good day at the
so
office, yeah.
someone much smarter than I am would give me an idea, and then I would say, "All
Mhm.
right, what would need to be the case for this idea to happen?" Well, first of all, do I like this idea?
Right, yeah.
Um, and then assuming I'm enthusiastic about it, and then I would vet that idea with other subject matter experts to make sure
Mhm.
that there was broad excitement within the relevant community for this. But then assuming that I still thought it was worth pursuing, what is the coalition that I would need to build in order to make it
Mhm.
happen?
So, when from hearing the idea to Congress passing funding, what was the timeline there like? And how was it, constant work on this, or was there a lot of other things going on and this was sort of
Oh,
like
yeah.
a background
Y
project you kept
Yeah, no,
pushing on?
this is usually I mean, the reason that I was able to stay sane in the government is that I was working on a lot of different things at once,
Mhm.
so that if something was taking longer than I wanted, I could just work on something else. So, it was announced by President Obama in April of 2013. Well, he referred to it in the State of the Union. Yes, but it was 3 words. It was, comma, "mapping the brain," comma.
Okay.
So you had to be really clued in to know what that
To
was a
know.
reference to
But you
because he
knew
had
and the people working on it knew, which
the
is
people
very
working on it
exciting.
were, like, stunned. They were like, "Oh my god."
Oh,
But
that's
then
great.
so then he announced it in an event that he did in the East Wing that was like the Woodstock for neuroscience. There were
Oh,
all
wow.
these and I have a funny story about that if you ever wanna hear that. Um,
Great.
but it took me, like, most of 2012, um, to do a couple things. Number one was work with the research community on the research agenda. Um, you go from this very broad vision of we want to be able to understand how the brain works and we need new tools to something more specific. And then to work with all the agencies to make sure that they were on board, and then to the Office of Management and Budget, and the White House and the White House speechwriter in like and ultimately the president to get everyone to support this.
Wow. Yeah. It's also really impressive to, drill down and get so many specifics on one topic, but then also be able to summarize it in 3 words is really impressive that you're able to get to both ends of that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Well,
so I call this, forest, trees, leaf, and chlorophyll, right?
mhm,
So if you wanna be able to do agenda setting, by which I
mm,
mean, uh, what are we not doing that we should be doing? Or
mhm,
conversely, what are we currently doing that we should stop doing? You have to have the ability to describe the idea to different types of people, at different levels of detail.
mhm,
So, the science agencies would wanna know, well, what's the technical agenda, right?
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but the White House speechwriter, would be interested in the question, what should the president say about this? How does he convey the essence of the idea, um, to a broad audience? And OMB would wanna know, how much is this gonna cost and why?
Yeah. And why is important there. Yeah. Well, you've spoken a lot about, these an initiative like this and what it takes to get the government, different pieces of the government all on the same page. Were you also having to try to align, academia and industry around specific scientific goals alongside government at
Yes,
the same time? Mhm.
yes. So the way in which we did that, um before it was announced, word started to get out within the neuroscience community. So, I had a number of neuroscientists calling me and saying, why wasn't I involved? Uh, um, but the important thing that we did was that NIH put together an advisory committee uh, to really involve the neuroscience community in developing a more detailed research agenda for the NIH component of the Brain Initiative, and that was very useful, in terms of, uh, having the neuroscience community believe that this would not be some, like, top-down initiative that they would have no say in. And, Corey Bargman, who was then at Rockefeller, and Bill Newsom at Stanford co-chaired that, and those are both leading neuroscientists, and that played a very important role in ensuring that the neuroscientists in the US were on board, because at the same time, there was a European brain initiative that there was no consensus for, and got so bad that a number of the neuroscientists wrote a letter to the European Commission saying, essentially, "We think this is a bad idea, and we wouldn't take money from this initiative if you funded it."
W Wow. How did it get to that? How did it get that bad? Jeez.
Um, yeah, so anyway, this, um, that that making sure that the neuroscientists knew that they were gonna have a voice in shaping it, I think was important.
Mhm. Kind of from the beginning, they knew that
Yeah,
they would have a say in what it ended up looking like, which yeah, sounds
absolutely.
really
Yeah.
that makes sense. So you have served in 2 presidential administrations, you've worked in
Mhm.
universities and nonprofits, and now you're leading Renaissance Philanthropy. Is there a specific problem that you're trying to solve with this new organization that you felt like you
Yes,
couldn't solve from inside the government? Yeah, would can we
yes,
let's hear about that.
yes. So, the our vision is that in the same way that wealthy Italian families supported the Italian Renaissance by backing Michelangelo and Da Vinci, today's philanthropists could be supporting a 21st century Renaissance that is fueled, at least in part, by advances in science, technology, and innovation. In the US, we have 2,000 families with $500 million or more in wealth. I think billionaires in the US collectively have $7 trillion. Uh, the for these 2,000 wealthy families, their average level of philanthropy is 1.2%. as a percentage of their wealth. So if you assume that they're doing as well as an index fund, they could be dramatically increasing their philanthropy with no reduction in their wealth. So several things are true. One is that these philanthropists uh, have a significant amount of wealth, number one. Number two, the relative importance of philanthropy for science is becoming more important because of some of the changes that are happening at the national level. Uh, Number three, philanthropists have a large amount of flexibility. And the reason that is important is that there are all these things that we're not doing that we should be doing because of the way of the sort of the combination of the incentive structure of academia
Hmm.
and the way in which the federal government traditionally makes funding decisions. And I'm happy to give some examples of that.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to, yeah, kind of hear what you see as the major differences there and what you view
Yeah.
as like the upside of the philanthropy funding model.
Yeah. So I think the upside of the philanthropy model is for if you think about the typical way in which the government funds science, we use peer review committees to allocate relatively small grants to professors at universities for the purpose of supporting their graduate students and postdocs. And I think that is like a very important way to support science, and I think we should continue to do that. I also believe that there are important scientific problems for which that is not the right way to support science and innovation.
Interesting. Could
Uh,
you give an example of a problem where that's the case?
yeah. So, um, if you are a professor, you are rewarded for novelty.
Mm.
You are rewarded for new ideas.
Mhm.
So, if you in order to generate a research result, or maybe more likely your graduate student or your postdoc has to write some software. When you are done with that research project, you have zero incentive to say, I'm going to take that software and I'm going to improve it to make it easier to use. And I'm going to make sure that it's well documented. And I'm going to maintain a vibrant open source community of other people who are contributing to that and making it better. And the reason is that, uh, particularly if you're trying to get tenure, it's highly unlikely that that will be viewed as a the type of intellectual contribution that you would get rewarded for.
That's so interesting because that seems so sensible as something that
Yeah.
you would want to do.
Well, so there was a researcher who developed Jupyter, which is this incredibly useful software.
Yeah.
And his mentors advised him not to work on this. They said, "You are committing career suicide by this because this is not helping you generate lots of highly cited papers."
Mm. And that's the end goal of science, as we all know.
No, I mean, it's this, like, very
Yeah.
imperfect metric that we use
Yeah.
to evaluate someone's
Fascinating.
contribution, which is what is their H index. So an H index of 30 means that you have 30 papers that have each been cited 30 times or more. Now, obviously, I think people are trying to experiment with new ways of evaluating someone, and rather than saying, "Well, what's the total number of papers that you have?" Um, Maybe looking at a smaller subset of the ones that have been really truly transformational. But, you know, the there's this, I think, inclination when we're having to make a high stakes decision to say, can we come up with an easy to quantify metric that allows us to make this decision as opposed to relying heavily on human judgment?
Yeah. And so how is Renaissance Philanthropy working on that? What do you have a
So,
metric that you're using, or is it still a work in progress?
so in addition to my role as CEO of Renaissance Philanthropy, I'm also the chair of Convergent Research, and that has been supporting 10 focused research organizations. And many of all of these are important projects that would never happen in academia. So, um, the broader concept is what some people call meta science. And what they mean by that is we should apply the experimental method to how we fund research. So, in the same way that we do experiments to learn new things, we should say we should be more systematically exploring alternative mechanisms for funding research. And the British have this saying, which I love, horses for courses. And what they mean by that is it doesn't make any sense to say what is the ideal racehorse until you
Mhm.
know course the horse is going to be running on, right? And so
Oh,
I don't think
yeah.
it doesn't make sense to say, how should we fund research in the
Mhm.
absence of knowing what type of problem are we trying to solve?
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so can you give some more context on I'd love to hear more about your work at Convergent Research and what progress you have made there.
Yeah. So I serve as the chair, and
Mhm.
I worked with the co-founders, um, uh, Adam Marblestone, who is the CEO, and Anastasia Gamick, who's the co-founder. And they had this idea, which is that there's an important class of scientific and technological problems that you can't do as a venture-backed startup, but are also difficult to do in academia because the effort required is larger than you can do in a single academic lab. It requires very high levels of team science. It will benefit from a mix of scientists and professional engineers, and it may involve doing something that is good for the field, but doesn't disproportionately benefit the team that works on that. So in that case, what they proposed was creating time-bound research nonprofits with the CEO. So they are nonprofit startups for science. And as I said, they're working on things like lowering the cost of mapping the brain by a factor of 100, developing the tools that we need to know whether ocean-based carbon dioxide removal is going to be safe and effective. There's a project called EVE, which stands for Everything versus Everything. It's going to be mapping the interaction between every drug and the most important classes of drug targets and releasing that as a public data set
Oh,
so
wow.
that machine learning researchers can use it for drug discovery.
Oh, fascinating. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
So how is Convergent Research like picking these ideas? And I guess this is also a question for Renaissance Philanthropy. I mean, there's so many cool ideas out there. How do you decide which ones to focus on?
that's a great question.
Mhm.
So the core Renaissance philanthropy model
Mhm.
is a time-bound, thesis-driven philanthropic fund. So it has 3 elements associated with it. The first is the thesis. That is, what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and why do we think that philanthropy should work on this as opposed to someone else, right? So if a VC would fund it, then philanthropy doesn't need to fund it. So, philanthropy only needs to support, scientific research, for example, if there's if it's too early for venture or it's working on something really basic and fundamental, like why is the universe expanding at an accelerating rate? A VC isn't going to fund that. Or the innovation in question is going to help low income people in developing countries. They're not going to fund that. So there's like a lot of really, really important things that VCs don't fund. So the first part is the thesis. The second is what is the team that would do a world-class job of allocating that philanthropic capital? So someone is who has deep domain expertise in that particular area. So, for example, we have a program on the intersection of AI and math, and we have as one of our advisors Terry Tao. He's a UCLA professor who won the Fields Medal, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in math. And he was getting 760 on his math SAT by the time he was 8. Uh, and even the other Fields medalists, are just stunned, by his breadth and depth. So most mathematicians, even at his level, will pick one sub-area of math, and he's made important contributions. So having someone like his an advisor increases the confidence of the philanthropists that, we will do a good job of stewarding their funding. So we have
Got
the thesis, we have the
it. Mhm.
world-class team, and then we
Mhm.
have the
Okay.
And it
Okay.
could be more than one. It could be a group of like philanthropists and foundations. So, for example, we have a collaboration that we're involved in that involves Gates and Balmer, and
Mhm.
that's using technology to expand access to benefits for low income families.
Oh, great.
So,
Cool.
so ultimately, we need all three of those things: the thesis, the world class team, and the funder or funders. But
Mhm.
we can't do start with any of those three. So just yesterday, we announced a series of projects in this intersection of AI and math that are being funded by Alex Gurko, who's the CEO of a XTX Markets, which is a UK-based algorithmic trading firm, and he's very interested in this intersection between AI and math. And so we have been working with him and his team, and he's been very generous in supporting work in this area, which we're helping to lead for him. So
Wow.
that's an
What are those
instance.
what are those projects gonna be working on specifically?
Lots of different areas, but
Mhm.
one is to imagine that in the same way that we have co-pilots for software engineering, we now have
Mhm.
AI-based tools that help a software engineer, that you
Mhm.
would have co-pilot for a mathematician who is trying to discover new mathematical theorems.
Wow.
Um, and so we're not at the point where we can just tell an AI, solve this math problem that no one has ever solved before. Um,
Yeah, not
but
quite.
the idea is that, you know, an AI and a mathematician would be more powerful than one or the other.
That's really fascinating. That's really cool, and great that there's someone who is so passionate about that and wants to see that funded. I could see that sometimes it might be, I don't know, if I could tie my name to, like, discovering why the universe is still expanding versus a math co-pilot, I might pick the sexier one, so it's great that you're finding people that are
Well,
interested in all these super
yeah,
important things.
no, so it turns out that the same technologies that you need to prove mathematical theorems can also
Mhm.
help cybersecurity, because you can also prove that hardware and software are safe and secure and robust. And right now, that's very expensive. So a company like Amazon will do that, but only for applications like whether you are allowed to log into the AWS cloud, right? So if it's mission critical, they're willing to spend the money on what's called formal verification. But we'd like to be in a position where we can just automatically generate not only code, but code which is secure, so that we reduce our vulnerabilities to cyber attacks. So even things that you might think of as being very somewhat obscure w- end up playing a really important role in addressing an important societal challenge.
That's so cool. And so who is it, the advisors who are all, like, kind of making the connections of all these different applications that projects could have? Or is it the people who are bringing the proposals to you that say, "And here's all the different ways that this could be beneficial?"
Yeah. So, it's in this particular instance, in this AI for Math fund, we did an open call and we got over 200 proposals. And then our
Wow.
advisors helped us evaluate which are the ones that they thought would be the most meritorious.
Okay,
Um, so
cool.
yeah.
What a fun job to get to look through all of that. It must be hard to pick the winners, I bet.
Well, what is amazing is um I just got to talk to all these amazing scientists and engineers and innovators who just have these really game-changing ideas. Uh, and then I also spend time with philanthropists and foundations to find out what their priorities are, and then to try to. So, one of our views is that there are a lot of philanthropists and foundations who would like to get started, but some of them are still professionally active. And so they just don't have a lot of time. Or even if they have more time, they don't wanna have to manage a staff, or maybe they're still trying to figure out what their priorities should be, so they don't wanna have to hire a staff without knowing that's the area where they wanna make a long-term bet. So what they can do by working with us is just get started right away. So they could say, "Hey, I'm really interested in" um, the role that AI and the science of learning could play in middle school math. So, that's the collaboration that we're working on with the Walton Family Foundation,
Oh,
for
well,
example.
how cool. Wow.
Yeah,
Well, that's fascinating. I want to ask you about another proposal I saw that you guys are asking for people to submit what they would view as game changing data sets. Can you talk about that new proposal and why
absolutely.
that's so
Yeah.
important?
Yes. So, um, one thing to understand is that AI and machine learning, the advances from that have often occurred when we've had the data. So if you said, people have been working on AI since 1957. There was a workshop at Dartmouth where they said, they were very confident about all the progress that we're going to make over the summer, and it's just taken a little longer than perhaps they thought. Uh,
Just a
but
little.
if you said, so we've gone through these periodic AI summers followed by AI winters, and if you said, why are we in an AI summer right now? The answer is that a Stanford professor, Fei Li, often called the godmother of AI, she put together this giant data set of images, and she put together a called ImageNet. I think it was 14 million images. And then there was also a metric for evaluating how good an algorithm was at predicting the caption associated with a given image. So like how would a algorithm be able to distinguish between a cat and a dog, for example? And in 2012, some people in Jeffrey Hinton's lab blew everyone else out of the water with these approaches that we call deep learning. And so there were three things that came together. These research area called deep learning, but it had been around for a while, right? So it like one of the seminal papers was written in 1986. So it wasn't like these were like necessarily brand new ideas, although there were some improvements to that. So that was one thing. The second thing was the data set. And the third thing was that the same GPUs that NVIDIA had developed for, playing video games and doing good in graphics were also good at a type of math of linear algebra, which is what you need in order to be able to do this particular type of machine learning. So that is what has led to this, modern, more recent excitement about AI and machine learning. And it's almost always the case that it is that the right data is the key unlock. So why did Demis Hassabis, the CEO of DeepMind, and David Baker at the University of Washington, why did they get the Nobel Prize for their work on protein folding and protein design? It, the research community had been contributing to something called the Protein Data Bank for since 1981. And so Demis and his team looked at that and said, we have a well-defined problem. We want to know what's the shape of the protein if we know the amino acid sequence. We have this very high quality, well-curated data set called the Protein Data Bank. The community has agreed on uh, an eval, what the industry calls an eval, which is how would you evaluate the performance of that algorithm? And there was a leaderboard. So those four things, when they come together, is what allows us to make progress. So the issue is that, again, researchers are not really rewarded for creating data sets. And it comes back to this question of novelty. If I were a researcher and I said, I can create this data that no one has ever created before, they would definitely get a publication out of that. But They it's not the case that 3 months later, just because they doubled the size of the data set, that they would get another publication out of that, because the reviewers would look at it and say, "There's nothing new, you just added more data to the data set," right?
Got it. But it could be
So there
so
the
valuable for so many
could be
other things.
values. I mean, like the protein data bank leading to AlphaFold and RF diffusion and the Baker Lab and all the other advances, that has been totally game changing. So
Mhm.
the the question that I'm interested in asking the researcher is, what data sets do you think would be transformational for your field? in the same way that ImageNet was transformational for image recognition, that the Protein Data Bank was for protein structure prediction, and that
Mhm.
reading everything on the internet has been for large language models like Gemini and GPT and Claude.
Right, right. So people are gonna come to you with, like, "Here's the problem that I'm hoping to solve." Are you also asking for them to come to you with how are they gonna get the data, or is that a problem that they'll be working on
Well, we
with
we we wanna know they would get extra credit for that, but we wanted them to be able to say, "What's the problem that they're trying to solve, and
Uh-huh.
why do we think that they need data in order to be able to train an AI model to solve or an AI algorithm to solve that problem?"
Got it, got it. Okay, and so, presumably advisory board people will help identify that coalition or similar to, even in going to the president, like, how do we get to, like, this is the problem, how do we get to the solution? Who do we need to involve to get
Yeah.
that data set made?
Who who would have it so, for example, does the data exist? And
Mhm.
it's a question of, can we get people to share? Or does the data, need to be created from scratch? And could we lower the cost of generating that data? So a lot of these focused research organizations that philanthropists are supporting, their goal is lower the cost of generating the data by a factor of 100. Um, and the reason this is so important is that the Wellcome Trust has estimated that the cost of just mapping the mouse brain would be $10 billion.
Wow.
And spoiler alert, politicians are not going to give neuroscientists $10 billion to map the mouse brain.
Clever.
Um, but if we could lower it to 100 million, there are, philanthropists and foundations who I could see supporting that, or, maybe not doing the entire, human brain, but a portion of it. So I think that, not only do so there's a lot of things that we need to invest in if we want to use AI and machine learning, to accelerate the pace of scientific research and solve all these problems like, better materials for batteries or solar cells, dramatically lowering the time to develop medical countermeasures and vaccines for emerging pandemics. Um, all these areas where we wanna make progress. So data sets is definitely one of them, but we also want to invest in things like self-driving labs. So this is where you're using robotic equipment to do an experiment, and the machine learning is not only analyzing the data, it's informing what experiment to do next. So given all the results that you got so far, what is the next most valuable experiment to do? Um, you want to invest in technologies that, uh, in addition to creating these data sets, you also want to invest in technologies that lower the cost of generating the data. You want to integrate machine learning and simulation. Um, so these are all examples of things that we want to invest in. And I think one of the big benefits of AI and machine learning is the ability to reduce the time to solution. And that's very important when the problem is urgent. So if we're talking about pandemics, if we're talking about a problem like clean energy, where we have this limited window of time to solve the transition to a carbon neutral economy, if we're talking about um, human health, those problems where we not only want to solve the problem, we want to solve it as quickly as possible. Those
Mhm.
are the I personally would focus on.
Got it.
But
That's so perfect. I did wanna ask the question. I think you're already sort of getting to it. It's something I've seen in reading your work that you emphasize a lot is the idea of science for the benefit of all. And so
yeah,
how do we make sure that accelerated discovery, whether it's through AI or new institutions or better funding
mhm,
models, how do we make sure that these new discoveries actually reach the people and the problems that need it most?
yes. Well, I think it starts off with uh, agenda setting and problem definition. So a lot of times you see people saying, what is AI going to do to us? What impact is AI going to have on us? And although I certainly understand the impulse behind that question, I wanna push back on it because I want people to instead ask the question, "What do we want it to do for us?" So, what are the problems that we really care about, like longer, healthier lives, like the ability to, uh, respond to pandemics, like the need to accelerate the transition to a carbon neutral economy, like, uh, continuously upgrading the skills of workers who may be facing disruptions in the labor market. What are the goals that we have? And then do we think it's plausible that AI in combination with other, uh, areas of science and technology could make a real difference? And this, I think, is very important because usually it's not AI in isolation, it's AI in conjunction with other things, right? So if you want to use AI to double the rate of student learning outcomes in middle school math, which is the goal of this our learning engineering virtual institute that is supported by the Walton Family Foundation. You not only need AI, you need the science of learning, right? We've, over the last several decades, we've learned all these things about how you help a student master some challenging concept in algebra. And that knowledge about uh, how people learn needs to be reflected in the design of the AI system.
Yeah. Wow, that's so fascinating. That's really, it's really interesting to hear someone who's worked in so many different spaces on it. I think you have a really good grasp of what exactly is needed, not just to make these things happen, but to make sure that they're reaching the people that actually need them and are designed in a way that they continue to do so.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm very excited about the opportunities, but I don't think that we should be taking this passive stance.
Hmm.
I think we should be saying, what do we want? What would in a given area, what would constitute genuine progress? Uh, so for example, most people believe that it would be a good thing if if more people could live longer, healthier lives, right? And then you can say, well, what are the diseases that the most people are dying of? And then how could we use AI to accelerate progress in diagnostics, in therapies, in medical devices, in vaccines, in biomarkers, in fundamental understanding of that? Um, so yeah, that's what I get excited about when I meet a scientist or an engineer or a team or a community that has a, you know, big, important problem that they wanna go after, and there's some role that Renaissance Philanthropy can play in, in backing them by working with philanthropists and foundations who wanna do something, exciting with their wealth and not just let it, continue to pile up in their bank account.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
they say,
What
you can't take it with you, right? So
no, and what better way to spend it than, tackling these huge problems. So it's really
absolutely.
incredible. Yeah.
Ab
Um,
ab
I have
absolutely.
I have one final question for you. Some of the
Yes.
Accelerate Science Now coalition partners have started a book club. So far, we've been
Oh,
reading what someone might call like the science policy classics. So, "Endless Frontiers" by Bush and "Structure of Scientific Revolutions" by Kuhn. Would love to hear from you if you have any books or journals or maybe a podcast or something that's made a big impact on you from a science policy perspective.
yeah, so one recent one is by, Michael Nielsen and his co-author Kanjun, who wrote a long essay called "A Vision of Metascience," in which they talked about, uh, how we might apply the experimental method to how we fund research, and that I think that this can increase the level of ambition of the research community because they can imagine pursuing projects that they were previously unable to even contemplate doing because the funding mechanism didn't exist.
Great. Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of the people working on these problems, it's really valuable for them to hear because I can imagine that a lot of times you're looking at a problem and just how do I get the funding might stop all creative ambition. So that does seem really important for people to read.
And if I could add one more,
Of
people
course.
should check out the gap map,
Mhm.
which is on the Convergent Research website. and these are over 100 uh, areas where additional investments in science and technology could accelerate progress in that entire field because people are identifying a binding constraint to progress and how that could be addressed.
Oh, wow, how valuable. And so, how can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? Is it just like a website that people can go look
Yeah,
at, or is it a journal,
yeah,
or
yeah. So if you go to convergentresearch.org,
Mhm.
you'll see a link to the gap map.
Great, great. Well, we'll definitely have to share that one. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tom. This has been incredibly informative. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and, tips for how we should move forward to make sure that science is working as best as it can for everyone.
No, thank you. I had a blast.
You've been listening to Accelerate Science Now. I'm your host, Adeline DeYoung. This show is produced by Kindred Subjects, Accelerate Science Now, and Seed AI. Our executive producers are Josh New and Austin Carson. Special thanks to Kevin King for editing and production. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.